Hey guys, welcome back to the fourth part of the complete menu, Legend of Zelda Master Quest. We're heading into Dungeon 6, and this is where the trend stops, where they start being shaped like letters. I don't know what that shape is, but the location's pretty easy to get to. You just have to push upon the gravestone. I'm not doing a good job right now, which is the correct gravestone, because every time you make a mistake, you summon more ghosts. But you do need the whistle in order to make one of the gravestones change into the set of staircase. And we are in here for the step ladder, and I believe the boss of this dungeon is Goma, if the title card didn't flash too quickly for me. Tackling wizards on a place with a lot of lakes is probably a bit more ideal, because it does limit their movement. Although they can go across the water, they can still float. They'll still limit themselves to the path of the land, so you'd be alright for the most part just sticking to the Isles. And like before, I recommend that you do skip as many rooms as possible. If it's something easy enough to kill, like this room with the Vias, then go ahead. Making the room empty is always an optimal strategy, because the controls are a little, I want to say, archaic. You can't move diagonally, you can only move in the four cardinal directions, and so you need a bit of extra time, more than you would need for most games. Like, at least from experience, I know that Mario 1's controls are a bit more fine-tuned. In terms of left and right movement anyway, in terms of directional movement. And it's a bit more immediate, but with Link you need some time, so clearing out a room of any potential threats allows you to enter the doors properly without getting a pot shot. And countless times off screen I've managed to edit this out, but there's been a lot of pot shot deaths. I believe you're invincible to damage while inside a life bike, but you do risk losing a shield. And I still managed to have it, so either it's something to do with your defense, or it's something to do with how quickly you get out of the life bike. That depends on whether or not you retain your shield. And so far I've been lucky, but I do manage to lose it in this playthrough once. And that means you do have to go amass the rupees and go buy it from the shop again. But going back to the game's controls, it's very simple but satisfying to play. But I would say, I've never played this on the original NES, but I'm not sure how its control pad would fare to the Wii U's one. Maybe it's better if people with some experienced veterans can tell me in the comments. But aside from everything else, the sword comes out more or less instantaneously. The weapons act how they do, but Link is hindered by his up, down, left, right movement. There is no diagonal, which may or may not make the game harder, because if everything moves on a grid pattern, then as do you, then I think it's a bit more easier to digest, especially with Dark Knights. If it was 3D movement in a 2D game, I think that would mess you up a lot more than if it was 2D movement in a 2D game. At least with Dark Knights and Wizards, they have a line sort of movement which allows you to predict where they'll be next. And you know, judge accordingly. If you and them were both moving in 3 dimensions, I think that'd be a lot more hazardous to try to hit a Dark Knight in the back, or try to dodge a Wizard's projectiles. You might see these random fade to the same room. That usually happens if I've gone the wrong path, or if I need a lot of time to think. Might as well save us a lot of time by editing all the mistakes out. And if anything, even the enemies like that aren't really restricted to line movement, they move in a grid. It does make it easier to dodge because they do seem to want to stay on one axis more often than not, and the Dongos have that kind of pattern behavior as well. So I would imagine that Zelda 1 on the NES would have the more optimal control if there wasn't I think it's like a couple seconds, no, I think that'd be too long, maybe less than a second delay. But direction is also important for your attack. If you're not facing the right direction, you miss your attack, so getting that right, minimizing that delay to near instantaneous would help the game immensely, because I enjoy this game. I find it a lot of fun. Even when I was recording it for the 100% run, I found it a lot of fun. Because there's that sense of progression, and a sense of, I wouldn't say puzzle or exploration. In the overworld, definitely there's exploration, but no puzzle elements. Like I've said before, there's not really much puzzle in, oh, let's push this block upwards like we did here. Given that there's 11 times 3, 33 different blocks in that room, and plus 2 directions, so that's 66 different attempts in that room alone. And that kind of translates a lot to the overworld. If you're attempting to set a bush on fire to open up an old man's house, or more accurate, old man's house to get a shop, or a moblin to get some rupees, the chances of you finding it through trial and error are nightmare inducing. It's ridiculous how many bushes there are and which ones are flammable or not. But yeah, minimizing that delay in directional input might make Zelda a little more fun, even if it's limited by its for north or south, east, west movement. And I believe I just destroyed the boss in a couple of tries. And I believe we are warping to the last set of rooms that are in that downwards part of the dungeon on the far right. And we got Manhandler. So we got a slew of bosses. I think we had Gleeok, we had Manhandler, we can skip, but Goma is the actual considered boss of this dungeon, so it's unavoidable. And I think this time you fight him, you've got the statues to worry about as well, so you can block the projectiles from the statues, but you can't block Goma's shots, so you gotta watch out for... They look identical, so you gotta be aware of which shots you're meant to block and which ones you're meant to avoid. A good strategy is to line yourself up with the statues and go left and right, so you can avoid Goma's shots that are coming from the top and block the statue shots that are coming from the side, left and right. And there we go, we got the 6th shard. At this point we're pretty much beefy enough to handle anything, and we got the defense and the power to make up for it. And we have the stepladder, which is a very handy tool. And we're going to go find the last heart container, which is, yeah, pretty much these isolated wooden platforms that we go to use the step ladder to get across. It's pretty easy. You probably would just see it very early on, but wouldn't know how to get to it. Well, the step ladder is what you use. The raft is not very helpful in this case. So we are 2 heart containers away from maxing out, and now we're going to head to Dungeon 7. Dungeon 7's a little hard to open. Hopefully I show how to get in. But you need to burn a bush from one side, as I'm showing here. The fire needs to travel over one bush to get to the other, and then you gotta lap around. It's not very far, but attempting to light the bush that conceals the dungeon entrance from the same screen is not going to get you in there, because the fire travels a set distance, so it's going to overshoot the entrance every time, so you gotta come back around. Now, in terms of difficulty, at least Dungeon 6 and 7, Wizrobes aside, I think it's not very hard. I think 7 might actually be considerably easier than 4. And that's something I'm finding a lot with these NES games, is that it's not World 8 or Dungeon 8 or the final level that's the hardest. It's usually somewhere around the halfway point, usually Worlds 4 or 5, that seem to give the most trouble. Not sure why that is, but at least that's what I found. But then again, you can tackle these dungeons in any order. So it really depends. On the dungeon itself, not its positioning in the order. But at least in the order we're taking these dungeons in, we're taking them numerically. So the actual dungeons labeled level 4 and 5 seem to be the hardest for me. Not as hard as this Dark Nut though. I think I might start to lose it, or no. When there's one Dark Nut left, I don't do my patented swing in a circle attack, even though I should. Another habit that you might want to get into, we have a consumable resource which you've been seeing, is the keys. You should always go out of your way to get keys for a dungeon, because if you're in a room full of enemies and they drop a key, then that key can be used in any locked door, so they're transferable over dungeons, and it might save you a harder fight later on. So if you get 2 excess keys in Dungeon 1, that might save you some time. In maybe Dungeon 8, for instance, where those 2 keys transfer over, and you can just open a locked door immediately and bypass a bunch of heavy fights. In terms of finding this stuff out, the guide that I have does not really illustrate which rooms hold which item drops, like mandatory item drops, and this is where a bit of behind the scenes comes through. I used a guide on GameSpot by a user named D-Angel, whose credit goes to him, for these very excellent maps for both the second quest and the first quest. I'll probably put a link to the maps in the thing below, but they helped me find the right rooms. Because you want to pick the right fights. You don't want to fight every enemy room you see, especially if one's full of hard enemies, just to see if there's a bomb drop or a key drop or something useful. There's one dungeon, we may have already gone past it through, where a bunch of regular enemies gives you the heart container, which you're accustomed to seeing boss characters give you that. But no, it's just like, say for instance, all these keys, you kill all these keys and you get a heart container. That'll throw you off, especially if you decide to skip over it. We should probably never skip a room full of keys. They're pretty easy kills and they don't do too much damage, especially when you have the defense ring on. And you see the arrow working its wonders there, kills the Pole's voice in one hit, and they were nicely lined up, so I took care of them both. And the orange Dark Nuts go down to your magical sword in one hit, so that's always an easy cleanup. You get the magical sword much earlier than you get the red ring, which is the next defense power-up. So we got the blue ring for with the blue ring for double defense, and we get the red ring for quadruple defense. But having that increased power makes a lot of these enemies a non-threat, even if they are managing to get a hit on me. Still relatively easy to dispatch. And you might have noticed this consistently through the playthrough, I do enjoy my default weapon to be the boomerang, because I like that stun chance. And I think, besides the boomerang, there's only a couple of other weapons that give you additional properties. The boomerang collects items for you at a distance, not keys, rupees and heart containers, so that's pretty handy, especially if it's behind a wall. And it also stuns enemies and one-hit KOs keys and... yeah, I think just keys. And the little tiny gels, they're called. The gels are the byproducts of the balls, those little slime blobs with eyes. When they split into tiny little Hershey's Kisses, they're called gels, so killing they will kill those in one hit. And here we got Manhandler, which I don't think is the boss fight, given we're not anywhere near the objective. But I managed to kill 3 of its claws, so it's losing its goddamn mind. And it's very generous for giving me some bomb drops. Another secondary use is when you upgrade the magic rod with the Bible, you get a fire effect at the end of the rod. I think I've discussed this before. But that fire can be used to light up dark rooms, so you can use it, effectively becomes a candle, and you can fire the magic rod as many times as you want. So it becomes a weapon and a candle at the same time, kind of making the candle useless, but there you go. And waiting with your step ladder on the waterways is a very effective tactic, because enemies do not go in the waterway unless they are wizards that can float above the water. But once you kill the Dark Knights, you got all the time in the world to correct yourself and hit a blue bubble. So, I mean, if you get the chance, just head straight to the water and wait it out there. Even the bubbles won't hit you in the water, so it's good strategy. It is a patience game though, you gotta wait for the enemies to cross your path. But more or less they do, given their tactics. They like to keep to a straight line a lot longer than normal. A lot longer than you, the main character, anyway. Here we go, here's the map. And this weird, like, snail shape we got for a dungeon. While the Master Quest has the property that the first 5 dungeons spell out Zelda, the first quest has the property that all the dungeons link together in some sort of shape. But given that there's only 3 left, they don't seem to have that kind of property, because there's no dungeon that fills in those black parts. There's no dungeon that has a little curled section that fits in where that black part is in the dungeon map up there. Yeah, no, just skip that one. That other map, when on the pause screen, that shows you the rooms you've traveled in. So that's handy if you know the general direction you want to go. And for this dungeon, the general direction is to follow the thin path up and around. That's how you get to the treasure and the Triforce. If you know the general direction of where you need to go, you will see the path you've actually traveled, and you'll be like, oh, okay, I need to go east, so you just head east, or I need to go west. And the usual strats for defeating Goma here. Just keep going left and right. And try not to be like me and take this fight on at less than half health, because despite how well you do, I've been getting a lot of good fairy drops, which is very lucky, but despite how well you do, you get a couple of pot shots, and you don't want to die in a dungeon this big. Probably the only easy death would be dungeon 3 and 4, because 3 is ridiculously tiny, it's that L-shaped dungeon, and 4 has that healing place where it's located. It's located near a fairy fountain, I believe it's called. Or, you know what, that's my official term for it. Once we get the red ring, these keys damage is going to be ridiculously negligible. It's going to be 1/8. At that point, you could just run in blindly. And I've decided they're not worth my time. I believe you can't go past him without paying. You see that I don't go and check. But there is some sort of invisible wall where the old man is and the fire is leading up to the room to the north. So I think there's only 3 mandatory paywalls, which now that I said that phrase, that's terrible. This is EA before EA got popular. It's like, would you like to continue? Pay 50 rupees to keep playing to get this loot box. Oh man. Microtransactions. This is what happened. EA saw this game and they got the idea. It's like, oh, if we can do that in-game, why can't we do that out of game? Genius. Hire this man. But yeah, there are only 3 mandatory paywalls in the entire campaign. You got 1 in, I think it was Dungeon 5, and about 2 in here. And for the most part, I think you can dodge the rest. While this is a bit slow, you don't want to be trapped by a Dark Knight, because if they're coming towards you, then there's pretty much not much you can do except run away. So, while tedious, I think sniping them with your Master Sword ability, or just arrow, for instance, arrow would do damage to their backs, is a viable strat. This room isn't too difficult. If you get hit by a bubble, you are invulnerable to touch damage for a bit. So it might be preferable to lose your sword ability by getting hit by a red bubble than getting hit by a dark knight. It does prolong your survival in this room. I've only lost about 3 hearts, and at that point it's not that bad. Yeah, and I was kind of having a sweat moment there with the red bubble chasing down my ass. Now this room's mandatory, so I'm not sure if I lose my shit here. No, I do. The links are raging. Do I die? No. I had the common sense to use a potion, given that we were so close to the boss, actually. Because a room like this, I mean, you want to play it smart, but every time you line up a shot to their back, you've got maybe an orb coming your way as well. I find this strategy works best even if it's not exactly tactical. And who do we have as the boss? Okay, we have Gleeok again with 4 heads. I think every time we run into Gleeok, he's got an extra head. At this point, you can pretty much tank it, so stand inside his neck and pretty much keep stabbing at the heads. Every time one dies away, makes the head invulnerable. And there we go, we got the 7th shard of the Triforce. Alright, with that guys, I'll see you with part 5 of the complete menu. See you.